The night Clara Voss pulled a rifle on 8 starving strangers at her door, she had no idea she was about to start a war that would either destroy the entire valley or save it. One desperate widow, one broken cowboy with 7 sons, one ruthless land baron who'd killed to own every inch of dirt from here to the horizon. Before winter ended, blood would soak into the frontier soil, and the woman everyone had written off as nothing more than a lonely ranch hand would become the most dangerous person Silas Grady ever underestimated. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The Winchester felt heavier than it should have. Clara Voss's hands weren't shaking. They'd stopped doing that the day she buried Thomas 3 winters back, but the weight still registered wrong. Too much metal. Too much consequence. She stood in the doorway of her farmhouse with the barrel leveled at chest height, watching the shadows take shape through the settling dust. 8 of them. Maybe 9 if you counted the smallest lump in the wagon bed that might have been a child or might have been a bundle of rags. Hard to tell in the dying October light. That's far enough. Her voice came out flat, not hostile, not welcoming, just empty, the way most things sounded when you'd spent 3 years talking only to yourself in the wind. The man in front raised both hands slow, didn't dismount, didn't smile, just sat there on a horse that looked as hollowed out as he did, all visible ribs and exhausted breathing. "Ma'am," he kept his hands up. "We're not here for trouble." "Everyone's here for trouble." Clara didn't lower the rifle. Difference is whether they admit it. One of the boys, maybe 14, maybe older but starved down to looking younger, shifted in his saddle. His hand drifted towards something at his belt. Not a gun. A knife, probably. Or maybe just his own hunger making him restless. "Easy." The man's voice cut sideways without him even turning his head. The boy froze. Clara watched that exchange with the part of her mind Thomas had trained to notice things. Control without cruelty. Authority without volume. Dangerous men usually shouted. Scared men usually begged. This one just existed in the space between, and that made him harder to read. "You got a name?" she asked. "Wade Mercer." He gestured backward with his chin, hands still raised. "These are my boys. We've been riding 4 days straight. Haven't eaten in 2. The youngest one—" He stopped, swallowed, started again. "The youngest one needs water. That's all I'm asking. Water for the kids, then we'll move on." Clara's eyes shifted to the wagon. The lump moved. Not Rags, then. A child, small enough that the motion barely registered. "Where's their mother?" Wade's face did something complicated. Not grief exactly. Something older than that. Worn down past the sharp edges of fresh pain into something that just sat in his chest like a stone. "Cholera took her last spring, took 2 others with her." The rifle barrel dipped half an inch before Clara caught herself. She'd buried 1 person. This man had buried 3, and still had 7 mouths depending on him not to quit. "You running from something or toward it?" "Both." Wade's hands lowered slowly. She didn't shoot, so he kept going. "Bought land north of here. Blackthorn Ranch, if you know it." Clara knew it. Everyone knew it. Cursed dirt that had broken 4 families in 15 years. Wells that ran dry. Cattle that sickened. Fences that collapsed under their own weight. The bank had stopped lending against it 5 years back. "That place'll kill you," she said. "Probably." Wade shifted his weight. The horse underneath him shuddered, and Clara realized the animal was close to foundering. But dying trying beats dying waiting. One of the middle boys, maybe 10, made a sound. Not quite a cough. Not quite a retch. Just the wet, hollow noise of a body trying to digest itself. Clara looked at the kid. Looked at Wade. Looked at the wagon, where the smallest one still wasn't moving right. The smart thing would be to send them away. Give them water, maybe. Point them toward town. Let someone else's conscience handle whatever came next. But Clara Voss had done the smart thing for 3 years straight, and all it had gotten her was an empty house that smelled like old grease and loneliness. "Barn's behind the house." She lowered the Winchester completely. "You can water the horses at the trough. I'll bring something out for the kids." Wade stared at her like he'd forgotten what unprompted kindness looked like. "We can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." "We've got—" He gestured vaguely at the wagon. "Tools, some old tack, A saddle that's still got, keep your things. Clara turned back toward the house, stopped. But if any of those boys touches anything that isn't theirs, you'll be carrying them back to that cursed ranch in pieces. We clear? Yes, ma'am. She left them there and walked back inside, setting the Winchester against the wall by the door, where she could reach it fast if her instincts turned out right. The beans she'd been cooking had scorched on the bottom, and the grease from the salt pork had started smoking up the kitchen. She scraped what she could salvage into a larger pot and started cutting cornbread into chunks big enough to fill young bellies. Through the window, she watched Wade dismount. Watched him help the smaller boys down one by one, checking each of them over with the efficiency of someone who'd done this enough times to have a system. The oldest boy, the 14-year-old, tried to lift the smallest one out of the wagon by himself and nearly dropped him. Wade caught both of them without a word, shifting the dead weight of the sleeping child into his own arms. Clara's chest did something tight and uncomfortable. She ignored it. By the time she carried the food out to the barn, Wade had already unsaddled the horses and gotten all 7 boys settled in the straw. They sat in a rough line, arranged by size, not saying much, just existing in that exhausted silence of people who'd learned that talking took energy they didn't have. The smallest one, maybe 5 years old, was awake now. Barely. His eyes tracked Clara with the glazed focus of a fever or hunger or both. This is all I've got tonight. She set the pot down in the middle of them. It's not much. The boys looked at their father. Wade nodded once. They didn't attack the food the way Clara expected. They passed the pot. They took turns with the single spoon she'd brought. They made sure the smallest one got the beans with the most pork, and the oldest one ate whatever was left at the end. Clara watched that and felt something crack open inside her ribs. Something she'd sealed off when Thomas died. Something she'd convinced herself she didn't need anymore. How old's the youngest? She asked. Charlie's 5. Wade crouched next to the boy, helping him hold the spoon steady. He doesn't talk much anymore. Not since... He stopped. Not since spring. And the oldest? Matthew's 15, thinks he's 25. Wade glanced at the teenager who was pretending not to listen while cleaning the bottom of the pot with a chunk of cornbread. Stubborn as his mother. Your wife raised them all herself while you were gone? It was a mean question. Clara knew it when she asked, but she'd learned a long time ago that men who showed up desperate usually had a reason, and sometimes that reason was their own fault. Wade didn't flinch. I was there. Worked a ranch 2 counties over, brought wages home every month. Wasn't enough. He shifted Charlie's weight in his arms. Never enough. So you bought a cursed ranch. Only thing I could afford. And if it kills you? Wade looked at her dead on. Then at least we'll die somewhere that belongs to us. Clara didn't have an answer for that. She picked up the empty pot and turned to leave. Ma'am? Wade's voice stopped her at the barn door. I meant what I said. We'll be gone by sunrise. Clara looked back at the 8 of them. 7 boys who'd probably never had enough of anything. One man who'd run out of options and decided to bet everything on dirt nobody else wanted. Storm's coming tonight, she said. You leave before it passes, you'll lose half those horses to the cold. We've weathered worse. I'm sure you have. Clara shifted the pot to her other hip. But you'll weather this one in my barn, and we'll talk about moving on when the sky clears. She didn't wait for him to argue, just walked back to the house, barred the door, and lay awake most of the night listening to the wind pick up and the first drops of ice start hammering the roof. Somewhere in the dark, she heard one of the boys cough. Heard Wade's low voice saying something she couldn't make out. Heard the horses shifting in their stalls and the old barn wood creaking under the weight of the weather. By morning, Hatchbone Creek would be talking. By noon, they'd be judging. Clara Voss, the widow who'd finally lost her mind and invited trouble to sleep 20 feet from her door. Let them talk. She'd stopped caring what the town thought the same day they'd stood around Thomas's grave and told her she should sell the ranch and move somewhere easier, somewhere softer, somewhere a woman alone could survive without breaking herself. She'd told them no then. She'd keep telling them no until they got tired of asking. And if that meant feeding 8 strangers and gambling that Wade Mercer was the kind of desperate that led to hard work instead of hard violence, then so be it. The worst that could happen was already behind her anyway. Nothing left to lose made a person either weak or dangerous, and Clara Voss had been alone long enough to know which one she'd become. The storm hit just before midnight. Not snow yet, but the kind of freezing rain that coated everything in a shell of ice and made the world sound like it was tearing itself apart. Clara sat by the kitchen window with a blanket around her shoulders and the Winchester across her lap, watching the barn for movement. Nothing. Either they were all asleep or Wade was smart enough to keep the boys quiet during a blow like this. She must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing she knew, the sky had that pale gray quality that meant dawn was trying to break through the cloud cover. The rain had stopped. The world outside looked encased in glass. Clara stood, joints protesting, and walked to the door. The barn was still standing. No smoke, no blood in the yard, no missing horses. She pulled on Thomas's old coat and walked across the frozen mud, her boots cracking through the ice layer with each step. Inside the barn, Wade was already awake. He sat with his back against a support beam, the smallest boy asleep against his chest. The other 6 were still down, buried in straw and whatever blankets they'd salvaged from the wagon. "Morning," Wade said quietly. Clara nodded. Storm passed. Heard. They looked at each other for a moment, Clara trying to decide if she'd made a mistake. Wade probably trying to decide the same thing.
"I'll make coffee," Clara said finally. "You get those boys up and ready. There's a water pump out back that still works. They can wash up if they want. You don't have to." "I know." Clara turned toward the door, "but I'm doing it anyway." Back in the house, she built up the fire and got the coffee going. Found eggs she'd been saving and decided 7 growing boys probably needed them more than she did. Sliced more cornbread, set out the last of the butter.
When they came inside 20 minutes later, they moved like soldiers, quiet, organized. Matthew herding the younger ones into a line while Wade carried Charlie. They stood there in Clara's kitchen, dripping ice melt onto her floor, looking like they expected her to change her mind and throw them back out into the cold. "Sit," she said. They sat. She put food in front of them and watched them try not to devour it. Watched Wade make sure everyone got an equal share. Watched Matthew cut Charlie's eggs into smaller pieces without being asked. "What's your plan?" Clara asked Wade. He looked up from his plate. "Head to Blackthorn, start clearing the land, maybe get a roof patched before the real snow comes. That ranch hasn't had a working roof in 5 years. Then we'll sleep under the stars until I fix it. And if you can't," Wade set down his fork, "then we'll freeze, but we'll freeze on our own land." Clara sipped her coffee. It was terrible. She'd never learned to make it right after Thomas died. "You know anything about running cattle?" she asked. "Some." "Water rights?" "Enough to know when someone's trying to steal them." "Fencing?" "I can learn." Clara studied him. He wasn't lying. He was just desperate enough to believe competence could be taught faster than winter could kill him. "Blackthorn's water source dried up 4 years ago," she said. "That's why the last family left. You planning to haul it in by wagon?" Wade's jaw tightened. "If I have to." "You'll be hauling until spring. Might make it to Christmas if you're lucky." "Then I'll make it to Christmas." Clara stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was finally breaking through the clouds, turning the ice into something that looked almost beautiful. Almost. "There's a spring 2 miles west of here," she said without turning around. "Feeds off the same aquifer that runs under my land. It's not on any property maps because it's seasonal. Dries up in summer, runs strong in winter." Wade went very still. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if you know where to dig, you can tap into it year-round. And if you can tap into it, you might actually survive long enough for those boys to remember what a full belly feels like." She turned back to face him. "I'll show you where it is. I'll give you tools. I'll even help you dig the first well, but..." She held up a hand before he could interrupt. "You work for it. Every hour I give you, you pay back in labor. My fences need mending. My barn needs reshoring. My livestock need feeding through winter." "Ma'am, I can't..." "Yes, you can." Clara's voice went hard. "You can, and you will, because that's the deal. I help you survive. You help me keep this place running. We both get through winter, and come spring, you're on your own." Wade looked at her like he was trying to find the trap, the catch, the hidden cost. "Why?" he asked finally. Clara thought about that. Thought about 3 years of silence, 3 years of watching her ranch slowly decay because one person couldn't maintain what 2 had built. 3 years of the town looking at her with pity and waiting for her to fail. "Because I'm tired of doing everything alone," she said, And you're desperate enough not to quit when it gets hard. Wade glanced at his boys, at Matthew, who was old enough to understand what was happening, at Charlie, who was young enough not to care as long as there was food. All right, Wade said. You've got a deal. They shook on it. His hand was calloused and rough. Hers was the same. One more thing, Clara said. If you cross me, if you steal, if you lie, if you put my land at risk, I will put you down myself. We clear? Clear. Good. Clara picked up the coffee pot. Finish eating. We've got work to do. By mid-morning, half of Hatchbone Creek knew about the arrangement. By noon, the whole town was talking. Clara found out when she rode into town for supplies and found the general store owner, Porter Finch, staring at her like she'd sprouted a second head. Is it true? Porter asked before she'd even tied off her horse. Is what true? That you've taken in Wade Mercer and his boys. Clara pulled her shopping list from her pocket. I've hired help, that's all. Help. Porter said the word like it tasted bad. Clara, that man's got 7 mouths to feed and no money to his name. He's going to bleed you dry before winter's out. Good thing it's my ranch to bleed then. I'm serious. People are worried about you. Clara looked at him. Really looked. Porter Finch had stood at Thomas's funeral and told her she'd need a man to run the ranch properly. Had offered to help by buying her land for half what it was worth. Had smiled the whole time like he was doing her a favor. People worried about me, Clara said slowly, or worried I might actually make it without selling to them. Porter's face went red. That's not... I need 3 bags of feed grain, salt pork, flour, and coffee. Clara handed him the list. Can you manage that, or should I ride to the next town? Porter snatched the list and disappeared into the back of the store. Clara waited, aware of the eyes on her from the street. Women whispering behind their hands, men watching from the saloon across the way. The whole town performing its favorite ritual, judgment of anyone who stepped outside the lines they'd drawn. She'd learned to ignore it. Mostly. Porter came back with her supplies and tallied the cost with sharp, angry movements. Clara paid in cash. Money she'd saved by eating less and spending nothing, and loaded everything into her wagon without help. As she climbed into the driver's seat, a voice called out from the boardwalk. Mrs. Voss. Clara turned. Samuel Grady stood there, hat in hand, smile polite. He was young, maybe 30, and dressed too well for Hatchbone Creek. Tailored clothes, clean boots, the kind of man who made money without getting his hands dirty. Mr. Grady, I heard about your new arrangement with Wade Mercer. Word travels fast. It does in small towns. Samuel took a step closer. I wanted to offer my congratulations. It takes courage to extend charity in times like these. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. It's not charity, it's business. Of course, Samuel's smile didn't waver. Still, I'd hate to see you take on more than you can handle. If you ever need assistance, financial or otherwise, my father and I would be happy to help. There it was, the Grady family circling like vultures. Samuel's father, Silas, owned half the valley and wanted the other half. They'd been trying to buy Clara's land since before Thomas died. I'll keep that in mind, Clara said, which was polite for go to hell. Samuel tipped his hat. You do that. And Mrs. Voss? His smile sharpened. Be careful who you trust. Wade Mercer's got a reputation. So do I. She drove off before he could respond, but the interaction sat in her gut like bad meat. The Gradys didn't make social calls. They made investments. And if they were suddenly interested in Wade Mercer, that meant something. She just didn't know what yet. Wade and the boys had already started on the fence line by the time Clara got back. Matthew and the next 2 oldest, James and Daniel, were digging post holes while Wade measured and cut new rails. The younger 4 watched from the wagon, Charlie asleep again in the midday sun. Clara unloaded the supplies and walked out to where they were working. You're doing it wrong, she said. Wade looked up, sweat already darkening his shirt despite the cold. Ma'am, posts need to be deeper. Ground freezes in 2 weeks, you'll have rails popping out by December. She picked up a shovel and demonstrated, driving it deeper into the earth than Wade had marked. Like this. 3 feet minimum. 4 if you can manage it. Wade watched her work for a moment, then nodded. Boys, you heard her. Deeper. They adjusted without complaint, and Clara felt a flicker of something that might have been respect. These kids knew how to take direction, knew how to work. That was rarer than people thought. She worked alongside them until the sun started dropping, her back screaming and her hands blistering inside her gloves. When they finally stopped for the day, they'd finished half the fence line, more progress than Clara had made in 6 months alone. "Not bad," she said. Wade wiped his face with his sleeve. "We'll finish the rest tomorrow." "Day after. Tomorrow I'm showing you that spring I mentioned." Something shifted in Wade's expression. Hope, maybe. Or just the desperate gamble that someone wasn't lying to him for once. "All right," he said quietly. That night, Clara made dinner for 9 instead of 1. It felt strange. Wrong. Like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't anymore. But when Charlie fell asleep at the table and Wade carried him back to the barn without waking him, Clara realized something. She wasn't pretending. She was just remembering. They rode out at dawn. Wade on his half-dead horse, Clara on the mare she'd managed to keep fed through sheer stubbornness. Matthew came with them, old enough to help dig and young enough that leaving him behind would have started a fight. The spring was exactly where Clara remembered, hidden in a shallow depression between 2 hills, marked by a cluster of cottonwood trees that somehow survived every drought. Wade dismounted and knelt by the water, cupping it in his hands and tasting it. "It's good," he said, surprised. "Told you." "And this feeds off the same source as your wells?" "Should. Ground here's all connected. You dig deep enough in the right spot, you'll hit it year-round." Wade stood and looked around, his mind already working through the logistics. "How far from Blackthorn?" "1.5 miles. Maybe less if you cut through the valley. Still too far to pipe it. So you dig a well on your land that taps the same source. I'll show you where." Matthew had been quiet the whole ride, but now he spoke up. "Why are you helping us?" Clara looked at the boy. He had his father's eyes. Cautious. Tired. Old before his time. "Because your father made a deal," she said. "And I need the help. People in town said you're crazy for taking us in." "People in town say a lot of things. They said we're trouble." Clara smiled, sharp and humorless. "They're probably right." Matthew stared at her, trying to decide if she was mocking him. Wade put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Matthew, enough." "But I said enough." The boy went quiet, but Clara could see him still turning it over in his head, trying to find the angle, the betrayal, the moment when kindness would reveal itself as something uglier. She recognized that look. She'd worn it herself for 3 years. "Come on," she said, climbing back onto her horse. "Let's go find where you need to dig." They spent the next week surveying Blackthorn Ranch. The place was worse than Clara remembered. The house was a rotted shell. The barn had collapsed entirely. Fences hung in pieces like broken teeth. But the land itself wasn't cursed. It was just neglected. Previous owners didn't know what they were doing, Clara said, standing in what used to be the main pasture. They tried to run cattle without securing water first. Tried to plant crops in soil that needed another year to settle. Tried to do everything at once and ended up doing nothing right. Wade looked at the wasteland around them. "What would you do?" "Focus on one thing, get water. Everything else follows from that." "And if the well doesn't hit?" Clara met his eyes. "Then you pack up and leave before winter kills you all." She meant it. If the water wasn't there, no amount of hard work would save them. Wade seemed to understand that. He nodded slowly. "Where do we dig?" Clara pointed to a spot north of where the old barn used to stand. "There. Ground's lower, closer to the aquifer." They started digging the next morning. Wade, Matthew, James, and Clara taking turns with the shovel while the younger boys hauled rocks and cleared debris. It was brutal work. The ground was hard-packed and full of stones, and every foot down felt like breaking through iron. By the 3rd day, they were 8 feet deep and hadn't hit water. By the 5th day, they were 12 feet down and Matthew had stopped talking. By the 7th day, Clara started wondering if she'd been wrong. Then on the 8th day, Wade's shovel hit something soft. Mud. He dug faster. The mud got wetter. And then, water. It bubbled up slow at first, then faster, filling the bottom of the hole until Wade had to climb out to avoid drowning in it. They all stood there staring. 7 boys, 1 exhausted man, and a woman who'd gambled everything on geological memory. "We did it," Matthew said quietly. Wade put his hand on the boy's shoulder. said nothing, just stood there watching water pool in the hole they'd dug together. Clara turned away before anyone could see her face. Word of the well reached town faster than Clara expected. Within 2 days, people started showing up at Blackthorn Ranch. Not to help, but to see if it was true. If Wade Mercer had actually pulled water from cursed ground. Most of them left disappointed that he had. But one visitor stayed longer than the others. Samuel Grady rode up on a black horse that probably cost more than everything Wade owned. He sat there looking at the well, the beginnings of a new fence line, the boys working to clear the collapsed barn. "Impressive," Samuel said to Wade. "I didn't think you'd last a week." Wade straightened from the post he was setting. "Still here." "So I see." Samuel's eyes moved to Clara, who was working 20 yards away. "And you've made quite the ally in Mrs. Voss." "She's been generous." "She has." Samuel dismounted, brushing dust off his expensive coat. "Tell me, Mr. Mercer, have you given any thought to what happens come spring, when the winter arrangement ends and you're on your own again?" Wade's jaw tightened. "We'll manage." "Will you?" Samuel walked a slow circle around the well. "Water's a good start, but you'll need cattle, equipment, feed, credit at the bank." He paused. "Do you have any of those things?" "Not yet." "Then let me make you an offer." Samuel pulled a folded paper from his coat. "My father owns the bank in town. He's prepared to extend you a line of credit, generous terms, minimal interest, to help you get established." Wade didn't reach for the paper. "In exchange for what?" "Water rights." Samuel smiled. "Just a small claim, enough to ensure the spring you're tapping into remains accessible to other landowners in the valley. Neighborly cooperation, that's all." Clara had stopped working. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read Wade's body language, the way he'd gone very still, the way his hand had drifted closer to the hammer hanging from his belt. "The water's on my land," Wade said quietly. "It stays on my land." Samuel's smile thinned. "Mr. Mercer, I don't think you understand the realities of your situation. You're one bad winter away from losing everything. My father's offer is the difference between survival and starvation." "Then I guess we'll starve." The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Samuel's polite mask slipped, just for a second, and Clara saw what was underneath. Cold, calculating, ruthless. "You're making a mistake," Samuel said. "Probably." Wade picked up his hammer. "But it's my mistake to make." Samuel stood there a moment longer, then swung back onto his horse. He looked at Clara as he passed. "Mrs. Voss," he said, "do reconsider my father's offer before you tie yourself to someone who's too proud to accept help." Clara drove her shovel into the ground and leaned on it. "I'll consider it the same day hell freezes over. How's that for a timeline?" Samuel's face went hard. He spurred his horse and rode off without another word. Wade walked over to where Clara stood. "I just made an enemy, didn't I?" "We both did." "You didn't have to." "I know." Clara pulled her shovel free. "But the Gradys have been trying to control this valley's water for 20 years. I'm not about to help them finish the job." Wade looked at her, really looked. "What did they do to you?" Clara thought about telling him. About how Silas Grady had tried to buy her land when Thomas died. How he'd sent men to sabotage her wells when she refused. How the town had slowly turned against her because crossing the Gradys meant losing access to credit, supplies, and social standing. But Wade didn't need her history. He had enough of his own. "They did what powerful people always do," Clara said. "They tried to take what wasn't theirs. And you stopped them. I survived them." Clara started walking back toward her horse. "There's a difference." Wade caught up to her. "What happens now?" "Now?" Clara swung into the saddle. "Now you finish that well, build a fence the Gradys can't cut, and get ready for winter. Because if Samuel's already making threats, it means his father's planning something worse." She rode off before Wade could ask what worse meant. She didn't need to explain. Men like Silas Grady didn't make offers. They made warnings. And when warnings got ignored, they made examples. Clara just hoped Wade understood that before it was too late. The first fence went down 3 nights later. Clara found it at dawn while checking her eastern pasture. 20 yards of rail cut clean through, not broken by weather or weakened by rot, but sawed deliberately in the dark. Her 6 remaining cattle had wandered through the gap, scattering across open range where they'd be easy pickings for rustlers or predators. She stood there in the freezing morning air, looking at the clean cuts, and felt something cold settle into her bones that had nothing to do with the weather. This was a message. By the time she'd rounded up the cattle and driven them back through the gap, Wade and Matthew had arrived on horseback. They must have seen her from Blackthorn and ridden over. "How bad?" Wade asked, dismounting. "Could have been worse. Could have been all of them." Clara tied off the temporary rope she'd strung across the opening. But it wasn't an accident. Matthew knelt by one of the cut posts, running his finger along the saw marks. "Who'd do this?" Clara and Wade exchanged a look. "Could be anyone," Wade said carefully. "A lot of people in town aren't happy about us being here." "It's not anyone." Clara started walking back toward her house. "It's the Gradys. They're letting me know what happens when I don't cooperate." "You don't know that for sure." Clara stopped and turned. "Wade, I've lived in this valley for 8 years. I know exactly how the Gradys operate. First they ask nice, then they make things inconvenient, then they make things dangerous. We're at step 2. "What's step 3? "You don't want to find out." She kept walking. Wade followed, leading his horse. "We should report it to the sheriff," he said. Clara laughed, sharp and bitter. "Sheriff Dawson's been in Silas Grady's pocket since before Thomas died. You report it, he'll write it down, nod real sympathetic, and do absolutely nothing." "Then what do we do?" "We fix the fence, we keep working, and we don't give them an excuse to escalate." Wade was quiet for a moment. "That's not going to stop them." "No," Clara agreed, "but it'll slow them down long enough for you to get Blackthorn livable before winter." Matthew had caught up to them. "What if they don't want to be slowed down?" Clara looked at the boy, 15 years old and already thinking like someone who'd learned the world didn't fight fair. "Then we deal with it when it comes," she said. But when it comes arrived faster than any of them expected. 2 days later, Porter Finch refused to sell Clara supplies. She'd ridden into town with her usual list: feed, flour, salt, nails, and Porter had looked at her like she was asking him to commit treason. "Can't do it, Clara." "Can't or won't?" Porter wiped his hands on his apron, not meeting her eyes. "Word came down from the bank. Anyone extending credit or goods to certain folks needs to clear it through them first." "I'm not asking for credit, I'm paying cash." "Doesn't matter." Clara set her money on the counter. Hard. "I've been buying from you for 8 years, Porter. Never missed a payment. Never caused trouble. And now you're telling me my money's not good? I'm telling you I've got a family to feed and a mortgage with the bank. I can't afford to cross them." "But you can afford to cross me." Porter finally looked up. There was something in his face that might have been shame, but it was buried under too much fear to matter. "I'm sorry, Clara, I really am, but you made your choice when you sided with Mercer." Clara stared at him. "I didn't side with anyone. I hired help." "That's not how the Gradys see it." "And how do they see it?" Porter's voice dropped. "They see it as you helping someone steal their water. It's not their water. It's underground. It belongs to whoever can reach it. Tell that to Silas Grady." Porter pushed her money back across the counter. "I can't help you, Clara. Go to the next town if you need supplies. But don't come back here expecting me to risk my livelihood for yours." Clara picked up her money. Looked at Porter one last time. "You know what the sad thing is? I actually thought we were friends." "We were. But friendship doesn't pay the mortgage." She walked out before she said something that would make things worse. Outside, a handful of townspeople had gathered on the boardwalk, not close enough to hear the conversation, but close enough to watch, waiting to see if Clara Voss would finally break. She didn't. She climbed onto her wagon, turned it around, and rode past all of them without saying a word. But inside, she was doing the math. The next town was a day's ride. She could make it there and back in 2 days if the weather held. But that was 2 days she couldn't spare with winter coming. 2 days Wade and the boys would be working alone at Blackthorn. 2 days the Gradys could use to make things worse. She was halfway home when she saw the smoke, black and thick, rising from the direction of her ranch. Clara whipped the horses into a run. The barn wasn't fully engulfed yet, but it was close. Flames crawled up the eastern wall where the old wood was driest, and smoke poured through the gaps in the roof. Wade was already there with the boys, hauling buckets from the well and throwing water at the base of the fire. It wasn't working. The fire was spreading faster than they could contain it. Clara jumped from the wagon before it fully stopped. "The cattle! Already out!" Wade shouted back. "Matthew got them to the north pasture. What about the tack?" "Most of it's gone." Clara ran to the well, grabbed a bucket, and joined the line. The heat was tremendous. The smoke choked everything. Her eyes streamed and her lungs burned, but she kept hauling water until her arms went numb. It took an hour to kill the fire. By the time they finally got it under control, half the barn was destroyed and the other half was too damaged to trust. Clara stood there covered in soot and ash, staring at the smoking remains of the structure Thomas had built with his own hands 15 years ago. "I'm sorry," Wade said beside her. Clara didn't respond. Couldn't. If she opened her mouth, something was going to come out that she wouldn't be able to take back. James, one of the middle boys, maybe 12, walked up holding something, a piece of cloth. He handed it to Wade without speaking. Wade looked at it, his face going hard. He passed it to Clara. It was a scrap of burlap, the kind used for feed sacks. But someone had drawn on it in charcoal, a crude sketch of a fence with a circle and slash through it, a warning, a threat, a promise that worse was coming. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," Clara said quietly. "No." Wade crumpled the cloth in his fist. "They're making sure we know." "Know what?" "That they can reach us anytime they want." Clara looked at the boys. They were exhausted, filthy, and scared. Charlie was crying silently against Matthew's chest. The younger ones looked shell-shocked. Even Matthew, who tried so hard to act grown, looked shaken. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about breaking them. Breaking her. Making an example so harsh that no one else in the valley would dare resist when Silas Grady came calling. "Take the boys back to Blackthorn," Clara said. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done the first time Porter refused to sell to me." She started walking toward the house. "I'm going to talk to Silas Grady myself." Wade caught her arm. "That's a bad idea." "Probably. He'll use it against you." "He's already using everything against me. Might as well give him the satisfaction of saying it to my face." "Clara." She pulled her arm free. "Go home, Wade. Keep your boys safe. I'll handle this." "You can't handle this alone." Clara looked at him. "I've been handling things alone for 3 years. This is just one more thing." She went inside, washed the soot off her face, changed into the cleanest dress she owned, and rode to town before she could change her mind. The Grady house sat on the edge of Hatchbone Creek like a monument to everything the rest of the town wasn't. 3 stories. White paint. Columns on the porch that served no purpose except to remind everyone who walked past that Silas Grady had money, and they didn't. Clara tied her horse and walked up the steps. A house servant answered the door. A young woman who looked at Clara like she was something unpleasant dragged in on someone's boot. "I'm here to see Silas Grady," Clara said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No?" "Then I'm afraid—" "Tell him Clara Voss is here about the barn he burned down this morning. Tell him if he doesn't see me in the next 5 minutes, I'm riding straight to the county marshal and filing a formal complaint." The servant's eyes widened. "Please wait here." She disappeared inside. Clara stood on the porch, aware that people were watching from the street. Good. Let them watch. Let them see that she wasn't backing down. The servant returned. "Mr. Grady will see you in his study." Clara followed her through a house that probably cost more than every ranch in the valley combined. Oak floors, crystal lamps, furniture imported from back east, everything designed to intimidate. It worked, a little. Silas Grady sat behind a desk that could have doubled as a dining table. He was older than Clara expected, maybe 60, with gray hair and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile genuinely decades ago. Samuel stood by the window, watching Clara with the same calculating expression he'd worn at Blackthorn. "Mrs. Voss?" Silas didn't stand. What an unexpected pleasure. Skip the pleasantries. Clara stayed standing even though there was a chair. "You burned my barn." "That's a serious accusation." "It's a true one." Silas folded his hands on the desk. "Do you have proof?" Clara threw the burlap scrap onto his desk. "Your men left this." Silas glanced at it without touching it. "Looks like trash to me. Looks like arson to me. Again, Mrs. Voss, unless you have actual proof, witness testimony, physical evidence, You're simply making unfounded accusations against a respected member of this community. Clara's hands curled into fists. Everyone knows you did it. Knowing and proving are different things. Silas leaned back in his chair. But let's say, hypothetically, that someone did burn your barn. Have you considered why? Because I didn't sell you my land. Because you're making poor decisions that affect the entire valley. Silas's voice went cold. Wade Mercer is tapping into an aquifer that feeds half the ranches in this territory. If he drains it dry, and he will, everyone suffers. I'm trying to protect this community. By terrorizing it. By maintaining order. Silas stood, and Clara understood why people were afraid of him. He wasn't physically imposing. He was just absolutely certain of his own authority. You want to know what happens next, Mrs. Voss? You continue helping Mercer, and I continue making your life difficult. Eventually, you'll run out of money or patience or both. You'll sell to me at whatever price I'm offering that week. And everyone will remember that you could have avoided all this suffering if you'd just been reasonable from the start. My choice. And if I go to the marshal? The marshal is 3 days away and has bigger problems than a land dispute in Hatchbone Creek. Silas walked around the desk. But by all means, try. Right out there, file your complaint. Spend a week waiting for someone to take you seriously. And while you're gone, I wonder what might happen to your ranch. Or to Wade Mercer's family. The threat was delivered so casually that it took Clara a moment to fully register it. You'd hurt children, she said slowly. I do what's necessary to protect my interests. Silas stopped a few feet away. Just like you're doing what you think is necessary to protect yours. The difference is, I have resources. You have stubbornness. We both know how that ends. Clara wanted to hit him, wanted to knock that smug certainty right off his face. But violence would just give him an excuse to have her arrested. I'm not selling, she said. Then you're a fool. Maybe. But I'm a fool with a burned barn and nothing left to lose. That makes me dangerous. Silas smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. No, Mrs. Voss. It makes you desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Samuel stepped forward from the window. Father, perhaps we could offer... We've offered enough. Silas cut him off. Mrs. Voss has made her position clear. Now she gets to live with the consequences. He walked back to his desk, dismissing her. Show Mrs. Voss out. Clara didn't move. This isn't over. No, Silas agreed, sitting down. It's not, but it will be soon. The servant appeared at the door. Clara left before she did something stupid. Outside, the sun was setting. The town looked peaceful in the orange light. Families going about their business, children playing, everything normal on the surface. But Clara could feel the rot underneath, the fear, the corruption, the silent agreement that Silas Grady owned this valley and everyone in it. She rode home in the dark, and when she got there, Wade was waiting on her porch with a rifle across his lap. You shouldn't be here, she said, dismounting. Neither should you, not alone. Clara walked past him into the house. I can take care of myself. I know you can, but you don't have to. She stopped, turned. What's that supposed to mean? Wade set the rifle aside and stood. It means I've been alone too. I know what that does to a person. Makes you think you have to carry everything yourself because asking for help is the same as admitting you're weak. I'm not weak. I know, but you're also not invincible. Wade gestured at the burned barn visible through the window. They're coming after both of us now. We're stronger together than separate. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to push back, but she was so tired of fighting alone. What are you proposing? She asked. Pool our resources. Combine the ranches. Work together until we're strong enough that the Gradys can't push us around. That's not how property works. Then we make it work. Call it a partnership, an alliance. Whatever keeps both our families alive through winter. Clara studied him. Your boys come first. That's the deal. If things get bad, you save them before you save me. That's the deal, Wade. Take it or leave it. Wade was quiet for a long moment. All right, but same goes for you. Things get dangerous, you get out, no heroics. Can't promise that. Then we've got a problem. Clara almost smiled. We've had a problem since the day you showed up at my door. Fair point. They stood there in her kitchen, two people who'd been broken by the frontier in different ways, trying to figure out if they could hold each other up long enough to survive what was coming. I'll move the boys here tomorrow, Wade said. Blackthorn's too exposed. They'll be safer on your land. What about the well you just dug? We'll work it during the day. Come back here at night. Split the labor between both properties.
Clara nodded. It made sense. It was also admitting that neither of them could do this alone anymore. One more thing, Wade said. If the Gradys come again, when they come again, we don't run. We don't hide. We stand our ground. That could get us killed. Probably, but I'm done being scared. Wade met her eyes. I've spent 5 years watching my family barely survive. Watching my wife die because we couldn't afford a doctor. Watching my boys go hungry because I couldn't provide enough. If I'm going to die anyway, I'd rather it be fighting for something than running from everything. Clara understood that. She'd felt the same way since Thomas died. The only difference was she'd been fighting alone. All right, she said. We stand our ground.
They shook on it again. This time it felt different. Less like a business arrangement and more like a pact. The next morning, Wade brought the boys over with everything they owned loaded into the wagon. It wasn't much. Clothes, tools, a few personal items. 7 boys' entire lives fit into a space smaller than Clara's kitchen. She helped them settle into the damaged barn, the part that hadn't burned. It wasn't comfortable, but it was dry and warmer than sleeping outside. Matthew hung back after the others went to work. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Helping us. You could have told us to leave after the barn burned. Could have washed your hands of the whole thing. Clara looked at him. You think I should have? I think most people would have. Most people aren't me. Matthew was quiet for a moment. My pa says you're stubborn. He's right. He also says you're the only person in this valley with any spine left. Clara hadn't expected that. Your father talks too much. He talks about you like you're... Matthew stopped, searching for words. Like you're someone worth protecting. I don't need protecting. I know, but he's going to try anyway. That's who he is. Clara didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know what to do with the implication that Wade Mercer saw her as something other than a business arrangement. Go help your brothers, she said instead. Matthew left. Clara stood there for a moment, then forced herself to move. There was work to do. Fences to mend, animals to feed, a ranch to run with half the resources and twice the enemies. Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm. Wade and the older boys worked Blackthorn during the day, improving the well, clearing the collapsed barn, starting construction on a temporary shelter. Clara and the younger boys handled her ranch, feeding livestock, repairing the burned barn, maintaining the property. Evenings, they ate together. All 9 of them crammed into Clara's kitchen that had been built for 2. It was chaotic, loud. The younger boys argued over everything. Charlie still barely talked. Matthew tried to act like an adult and mostly failed, but it was also the closest thing to a family Clara had felt in 3 years. She tried not to think about that too much. Then, 2 weeks after the barn burned, Porter Finch showed up. Clara was outside mending a fence when she saw him ride up. He stayed on his horse, looking nervous. Porter. Clara. He twisted his hat in his hands. I need to talk to you. About what? About what's happening in town. Clara set down her tools. What is happening in town? Porter glanced around, making sure they were alone. Grady's putting pressure on everyone, not just you. Anyone who might help you or Mercer. He's called in debts, threatened to pull credit. Some folks are losing their businesses. And you came all the way out here to tell me that? I came to warn you. Porter's voice dropped. He's planning something big. I don't know what, but I heard him talking to his men. Something about making an example before winter sets in. Clara's stomach went cold. When? Soon, maybe this week. Why are you telling me this? Porter looked at her. Really looked. Because I've known you for 8 years, Clara, and even if I'm too scared to help you openly, I'm not scared enough to let them hurt you without warning. It wasn't much, but it was something. Thank you, Clara said. Porter nodded and rode off before anyone could see him there. Clara found Wade immediately and told him what Porter had said. Wade's face went hard. Then we prepare. For what? Whatever they're planning. They spent the next 3 days getting ready, brought all the livestock closer to the house, set up watch rotations, taught the older boys how to load and fire the rifles Clara had kept locked away since Thomas died. Matthew took to it naturally. James was competent. Daniel was too young but tried anyway. I don't want them fighting, Wade said. watching his sons practice.
Neither do I, Clara agreed. But if it comes to that, I'd rather they know how to defend themselves. They're children. They're frontier children. That's different. Wade didn't argue. He knew she was right. The attack came on a freezing Tuesday night when the moon was dark and the stars were hidden behind clouds. Clara was on watch when she heard the horses. Multiple riders, coming fast. She rang the bell they'd set up, 3 sharp pulls, and Wade was outside with the rifle before the echo faded. "How many?" he asked. 6, maybe 8. "Armed?" "Assume yes." They woke the boys and got them positioned. Matthew and James inside the house with the younger ones. Wade and Clara outside with the rifles. The riders stopped just outside rifle range. One of them called out, "Wade Mercer, you've got one chance to walk away from this. Pack up your boys and leave the valley. You've got until sunrise." Clara recognized the voice. One of Grady's men, a hired gun named Doyle, who'd worked for the family for years. Wade didn't answer, just aimed his rifle at the space between them and waited. "We know you're in there," Doyle shouted, "and we know the woman's with you. Makes no difference. You don't leave, we're burning you out." "Try it," Clara shouted back. "See what happens." There was silence. Then Doyle laughed. "All right then, your funeral." The riders split up. 3 went left, 3 went right, circling. "They're going for the barn," Wade said. "Let them. It's already half burned anyway. If they torch it completely, we lose the feed stores." Clara swore. Wade was right. They couldn't afford to lose what little feed they had left. "Cover me," Wade said, already moving. "Wade?" But he was gone, running low toward the barn while Clara laid down covering fire that probably didn't hit anything but kept the riders honest. She saw torches light up, saw 2 riders break toward the barn. Then she saw Wade tackle one of them off his horse. The fight was brief and brutal. Wade was bigger, but the rider was armed. They rolled across the frozen ground, punching and grappling until Wade got his hands on a rock and brought it down hard. The rider stopped moving. Wade grabbed the fallen torch and threw it into the water trough, killing the flame. But the second rider had already reached the barn. Clara saw fire bloom against the wood, saw it catch. She fired, missed, fired again. This time the rider's horse screamed and reared, throwing its occupant. The man hit the ground hard and didn't get up. Wade was already at the barn, beating the flames with a blanket. Clara ran to help. But behind them, the remaining riders had regrouped. She could hear Doyle shouting orders, could hear hoofbeats circling back. "It's spreading!" Wade shouted over the roar of the flames. "We need water! No time!" He was right. The fire was moving too fast. They had maybe a minute before the whole structure went up. Then Matthew was there with a bucket. Then James, then Daniel. "I told you to stay inside," Wade yelled. "We're not leaving you." Matthew threw water at the base of the fire. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to send them back to safety. But there was no safety anymore. There was just this. All of them fighting together, or all of them burning. They formed a line, bucket after bucket. The water sizzled and steamed. The fire fought back. But slowly, so slowly, they started winning. Doyle's voice cut through the smoke. "Enough! Pull back!" The riders retreated. Clara heard them riding off into the dark. It took another 20 minutes to kill the fire completely. By then, everyone was covered in soot and gasping for air. Wade did a head count. "Everyone all right?" 7 boys accounted for. All coughing, but alive. "What about them?" Matthew pointed at the 2 downed riders. Wade walked over, checked the first one, the man he'd hit with the rock. Still breathing, but unconscious. The second one, the one thrown from his horse, was dead. Broken neck. Wade closed the man's eyes and stood. "We need to get him off our property." "We need to report this," Clara said. "To who? The sheriff who works for Grady?" "Then to the marshal. 3 days away, and by the time anyone gets here, Grady will have a dozen witnesses saying we attacked them." Clara knew he was right, but leaving a dead man on their land felt wrong. "So what do we do?" Wade looked at the body, at his sons, at Clara. "We bury him, and we keep our mouths shut, and we remember that this is war now." They buried the man before sunrise in an unmarked grave at the edge of the property. The unconscious rider woke up an hour later, and Wade sent him back to town on foot with a message for Silas Grady. "Tell your boss we're not leaving. Tell him the next man he sends dies. And tell him we're ready for whatever he does next." The man stumbled off into the dawn.
and Clara watched him go with a sinking feeling in her stomach. That was a mistake, she said. Maybe, Wade agreed, but I'm done letting them think we're easy targets. Charlie tugged on Clara's coat. She looked down. The boy was holding something out to her, a piece of cornbread he'd saved from breakfast. For you, he said quietly. First words Clara had heard him speak in weeks. She took the bread, and something in her chest broke open. These boys, this stubborn, exhausted, desperate man, this ranch she'd almost given up on. This was worth fighting for, even if it killed her. The town stopped pretending to be neutral after that. Within 2 days, everyone in Hatchbone Creek knew about the dead rider. The story changed depending on who was telling it. Some said Wade had murdered him in cold blood. Others said Clara had shot him off his horse. A few whispered that the whole thing was self-defense, but those whispers died fast under the weight of Silas Grady's money and influence. The sheriff showed up on the 3rd day. Clara was hauling water when she saw him riding up with 2 deputies. Sheriff Dawson was a heavy man who'd gotten comfortable behind a desk, and it showed in the way he sat his horse, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mrs. Voss," he called out, not bothering to dismount. "I need to speak with Wade Mercer." Wade emerged from the barn, wiping grease off his hands. "I'm here." "You're under arrest for the murder of Henry Sykes." Wade didn't move. "That what Grady told you to say?" Dawson's face reddened. "That's what the law says. Man's dead on your property. You're responsible. Man died trying to burn my barn down. That's self-defense. That'll be for a judge to decide. Now come on peacefully, or I'll have my deputies drag you." Clara stepped forward. "You've got no witnesses, no proof, just Silas Grady's word against ours. I've got a dead body and a dozen sworn statements from upstanding citizens who say Mercer's been threatening violence for weeks. Those citizens work for Grady. They're still citizens." Dawson finally dismounted, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Last chance, Mercer. Come quiet or come bloody. Your choice." The boys had gathered near the barn entrance. Matthew's hand was on the rifle he'd been carrying since the attack. James stood next to him, tense and ready. Wade saw them and shook his head slightly. "Stand down." "Pup," Matthew started. "I said stand down." Wade looked at Clara. "Keep them here. Keep them safe." "Wade, you go with him. You won't come back," Clara said quietly. "Grady owns the jail, owns the judge. You'll hang before you ever see a trial." "Maybe." Wade started walking toward Dawson. "But if I fight now, someone gets killed. Probably one of my boys when they try to help me. I won't risk that." "So you're just giving up?" Wade stopped and looked back at her. "I'm trusting you to finish what we started." Before Clara could respond, Dawson had Wade's hands behind his back and was clamping iron cuffs around his wrists. The deputies moved in close, hands on their weapons, watching the boys like they expected an ambush. "What about the man who survived?" Clara demanded. "The one Wade sent back to town? He can testify it was self-defense." "Can't testify if he's not here," Dawson said. "And according to Mr. Grady, no such man exists." "That's a lie." "Prove it." Dawson hauled Wade toward his horse. "You've got 2 days to get yourself a lawyer, Mercer. After that, you go before Judge Carrington." Wade was lifted onto a horse, his hands still bound. He looked at his boys one last time. "Matthew, you're in charge. Do what Mrs. Voss tells you." Matthew's face was white. "We're not leaving you." "You're doing exactly what I tell you." Wade's voice went hard. "You keep your brothers alive. That's your only job now, understand?" Matthew nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Clara watched them ride off, and the fury that had been building in her chest since the barn burned finally crystallized into something cold and sharp. Silas Grady thought he'd won, thought removing Wade would break the rest of them. He was wrong. She turned to face 7 boys who'd just watched their father get arrested for defending their lives. They looked lost, scared, young in a way they hadn't moments before. "Listen to me," Clara said. "Your father's not dead yet, which means we still have time. But I need you to trust me the same way you trust him. Can you do that?" Matthew straightened his shoulders. "What do you need?" "I need you to keep working. Keep this ranch running. Don't give anyone a reason to think we're falling apart." "And what are you going to do?" Clara looked toward town. "I'm going to find a lawyer who isn't afraid of Silas Grady." James laughed, sharp and bitter. "Good luck. There isn't one within 100 miles. Then I'll ride 100 miles. She saddled her horse within the hour, packed enough supplies for a week, and left Matthew in charge with strict instructions not to start any fights they couldn't finish. The nearest town with a real lawyer was 3 days north. Clara made it in 2, pushing her horse harder than she should have, sleeping in short shifts under cold stars. The town of Millbrook was bigger than Hatchbone Creek, with actual streets and buildings that didn't look like they'd collapse in the next strong wind. Clara found the law office on the main road, a small building squeezed between a hotel and a dry goods store. The sign read, Harrison Cole, Attorney at Law. Inside, a man in his 40s sat behind a desk covered in paperwork. He looked up when Clara entered, taking in her trail-worn clothes and exhausted face. Help you? I need a lawyer. I gathered. What's the case? Clara sat down without being invited. Murder charge, self-defense, corrupt sheriff, and a judge in the pocket of the man trying to steal our land. Cole set down his pen. That's quite a list. It's all true. I don't doubt it, but I'm not in the business of fighting unwinnable cases. I can pay. With what? You look like you've been sleeping rough for days. Clara pulled out the small leather pouch she kept hidden in her boot. Inside was everything she'd saved since Thomas died. $200 in gold and silver, money she'd planned to use to buy seed come spring, money that represented 3 years of barely surviving. She dumped it on the desk. Cole stared at it. That's everything you have, isn't it? Yes. And you're willing to spend it on a case we'll probably lose? I'm willing to spend it on the chance we might win. Cole leaned back in his chair, studying her. Tell me the whole story. Don't leave anything out. Clara told him everything. Wade showing up with 7 starving boys, the well they'd dug, Silas Grady's threats, the burned barn, the attack, the dead rider, Wade's arrest. When she finished, Cole was quiet for a long moment. This Grady sounds like a piece of work, he said finally. That's putting it mildly. And you think I can beat him in court? I think you're the only chance Wade Mercer has of seeing his boys again. Cole picked up one of the gold coins, turned it over in his fingers. I'll need witnesses, people willing to testify that Grady's men attacked you first. The boys saw everything. Children's testimony won't hold up against a dozen adults swearing otherwise. Then what do we do? Cole thought about it. We need someone from town, someone with credibility who can corroborate your story. Clara's mind went to Porter Finch. He'd warned her about the attack. He knew what Grady was doing, but would he actually testify? I might know someone, she said, but he's scared. Everyone's scared. The question is whether he's scared enough of what happens if Grady wins to overcome being scared of what happens if he helps you. Clara stood. I'll find out. Mrs. Voss. Cole's voice stopped her at the door. Even with testimony, this is a long shot. Grady's had years to build his power base. We're trying to tear it down in 2 days. Then we better not waste time. She rode back to Hatchbone Creek through the night, arriving just before dawn. The ranch looked quiet. No fires, no attacks. The boys had held. Matthew met her at the door. Any luck? Maybe. Is everything all right here? Grady's men rode past twice, didn't stop, just watched. They're waiting to see what we do next. Clara brushed past him into the house. Where are the others? Asleep. What do we do now? Now I go talk to Porter Finch, the man who refused to sell you supplies? The same. Matthew's jaw tightened. Let me come with you. No, you stay here. Guard your brothers. Mrs. Voss? That's not a request, Matthew. She left before he could argue, riding into town as the sun was breaking over the horizon. The streets were mostly empty, just a few early risers opening shops and sweeping boardwalks. Porter's store was still dark. Clara tied her horse and walked around back to the residence attached to the building. She knocked hard enough to wake the dead. Porter answered in his nightshirt, bleary and confused. When he saw Clara, fear flashed across his face. What are you doing here? I need you to testify. No, absolutely not. Porter, I warned you, Clara. That's all I can do. I testify against Grady in open court. I lose everything. Wade Mercer's going to hang if you don't. That's not my problem. Clara grabbed the front of his nightshirt. Yes, it is.
Because if they hang Wade, they'll come for me next. Then they'll come for anyone else who won't sell to Grady. Eventually, Porter, they'll come for you. And when they do, there won't be anyone left to help. Porter pulled away from her. You don't understand. I have a wife, children. I can't risk them. I understand perfectly. You're choosing your comfort over someone's life. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, but standing by while an innocent man hangs makes you complicit. Porter's hands shook. What exactly are you asking me to do? Tell the truth. Testify that Grady's been systematically pushing people out of the valley, that you've seen his men threaten ranchers, that everyone knows he's corrupt, but they're too afraid to say it. They'll destroy me. They'll destroy all of us if we don't fight back. Porter looked at her with something close to hatred. You have no idea what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking you to be brave for once in your life. She left him standing there and rode back to the ranch. She didn't know if he'd testify, didn't know if it would matter even if he did, but she'd done what she could. The trial was set for the next day. Harrison Cole arrived that evening with a satchel full of papers and a grim expression. I've reviewed the charges, he said, spreading documents across Clara's kitchen table. They're charging him with murder, not manslaughter. If we lose, he hangs. Can we win? Depends on whether your witness shows up. Clara had sent word to Porter that morning. No response. And if he doesn't? Cole didn't sugarcoat it. Then we're putting Wade's life in the hands of 7 children and a widow with a grudge. No judge will believe you over Grady's people. Matthew had been listening from the doorway. Then we make him believe us. How? Cole asked. I don't know yet, but we'll find a way. The boy's conviction was startling. Cole looked at Clara. He always like this? He's his father's son. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood on her porch watching the stars and thinking about Thomas, about the ranch they'd built together, about the life she'd lost and the one she was trying to save. Wade was in jail a few miles away, probably thinking about his boys, wondering if he'd made the right choice surrendering, wondering if Clara could actually pull off what she'd promised. She wondered the same thing. Just before dawn, she saw a rider approaching. Her hand went to the rifle beside the door, but it was Porter. He dismounted, looking like he hadn't slept. I'll testify. Clara stared at him. What changed your mind? My daughter asked me why the nice man who helped us fix our fence was in jail. I told her it was complicated. She said it sounded like he was being punished for being good. Porter's voice cracked. Out of the mouths of children, right? Porter, don't thank me. I'm terrified, but I'm more terrified of what I'll see in the mirror if I do nothing. Clara nodded. Cole will prep you. Tell him everything you know. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Half of Hatchbone Creek had turned out, some to support Grady, some just to watch the spectacle. Silas and Samuel sat in the front row like they were attending a theater performance. Wade was brought in wearing chains. He looked thinner than Clara remembered, exhausted but unbroken. His eyes found his boys in the gallery, found Clara. She nodded once. We're fighting. Judge Carrington entered, an old man who moved like every joint hurt. He'd been on the bench for 30 years, and everyone knew he owed his position to Grady family money. The prosecutor was a weasel-faced man named Fletcher, who'd made a career out of winning cases for the highest bidder. He laid out the charges with practiced efficiency, painting Wade as a violent drifter who'd murdered a man in cold blood. The defendant admits to being present when Henry Sykes died, Fletcher said. He admits to physical altercation. The only question is whether this court will allow such brutality to stand unpunished. When it was Cole's turn, he stood slowly. The question, Your Honor, isn't whether Henry Sykes died. It's why. And the answer is simple. He died while attempting to commit arson on Mr. Mercer's property. According to the defendant, Fletcher interrupted, we have no witnesses to corroborate. We have 7 witnesses, the defendant's children, all of whom saw Mr. Sykes and his companions attack with torches and weapons. Children's testimony is unreliable. Is it? Or is it just inconvenient for your narrative? Judge Carrington banged his gavel. Gentlemen, save it for examination. Fletcher called his witnesses first. A parade of Grady's men, all swearing that Wade had threatened violence for weeks, that he'd been unstable, dangerous, looking for an excuse to kill. Cole tore into each of them on cross-examination.
You work for Silas Grady, don't you? Yes. And Mr. Grady wants Mr. Mercer's land? I wouldn't know about that. You wouldn't know that your employer has been systematically buying up property in this valley for 20 years? Fletcher objected. Cole withdrew the question, but the seed was planted. When it was their turn, Cole called Matthew to the stand first. The boy looked small in the witness chair, but his voice was steady. He described the attack in detail, the riders, the torches, his father fighting to save their barn. And what did you do? Cole asked. I helped fight the fire. We all did. Because you were defending your home? Yes, sir. Fletcher's cross was brutal. Isn't it true your father is violent? That he struck you? No? Never? He's disciplined us when we needed it. That's different from violence. Is it? Or have you simply learned to accept abuse as normal? Matthew's hands curled into fists. My father is the best man I know. He's worked himself half to death to keep us alive. If defending your family from men trying to burn you out makes you violent, then I guess we're all guilty. The courtroom murmured. Judge Carrington banged his gavel. Cole called James next, then Daniel, each of them describing the same night from different angles, their stories consistent and clear. Then he called Clara. She walked to the stand, feeling every eye in the room on her. Silas Grady watched her with the expression of a man confident in his victory. Cole walked her through the timeline. Wade's arrival, the well, the threats, the barn burning. And you were present the night Henry Sykes died? Cole asked. I was. Describe what happened. Clara did. She didn't embellish, didn't make Wade sound more heroic than he was, just told the truth. They'd been attacked, they'd defended themselves. A man had died in the process. Mrs. Voss, why did you help Mr. Mercer in the first place? Clara thought about that. Because I was tired of watching decent people get crushed by bullies. Fletcher's cross-examination was vicious. Isn't it true that you have a personal vendetta against Silas Grady? I have a problem with men who use fear to control people. You refused to sell your land to him. Because it's my land, not his. And you saw helping Wade Mercer as a way to strike back at the Grady family? I saw helping Wade Mercer as the right thing to do. Fletcher smirked. How convenient that the right thing also served your personal interests. Cole stood. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained. But the damage was done. Fletcher had planted the idea that Clara's testimony was motivated by revenge, not truth. Then Cole called Porter Finch. The courtroom went silent. Everyone knew Porter, knew he'd never crossed the Gradys before. Porter took the stand looking like he might vomit. Mr. Finch, Cole began gently, how long have you lived in Hatchbone Creek? 20 years. And in that time, have you observed Silas Grady's business practices? Porter's eyes darted to where Silas sat. Yes. Can you describe them? Porter took a breath. Mr. Grady uses fear and economic pressure to force people to sell their property below market value. He controls the bank, the sheriff, and most of the town's credit. If you cross him, you lose everything. The courtroom erupted. Judge Carrington banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! Fletcher was on his feet. Your Honor, this is irrelevant character assassination. It's establishing a pattern of behavior, Cole countered. Mr. Grady had motive to harm Mr. Mercer. That motive is relevant to whether the attack was unprovoked. Judge Carrington considered this. I'll allow it, but keep it focused, Counselor. Cole turned back to Porter. Did you witness any of Mr. Grady's men threatening Mr. Mercer or Mrs. Voss? Not directly, but I knew about it. Everyone knew. We just didn't talk about it because we were afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of ending up like Wade Mercer, arrested on false charges, destroyed financially, run out of town. Porter's voice was shaking, but he kept going. I refused to sell supplies to Mrs. Voss because Grady threatened to call in my loans if I did. I'm not proud of that. But it's the truth. Fletcher's cross-examination tried to paint Porter as a disgruntled businessman with his own grudge. But it didn't stick. Porter was too ordinary, too clearly terrified. His testimony had the ring of truth. The final witness was Wade himself. He took the stand and Cole walked him through his version of events. Wade was calm, measured. He didn't claim to be a hero, just a father trying to protect his children. Mr. Mercer, Cole said, Did you intend to kill Henry Sykes? No.
What did you intend?
To stop him from burning down my barn with my sons inside it. And if you had to make the same choice again? Wade looked at Silas Grady. I'd make it the same way. Every time. Fletcher's cross was predictable. You're a violent man, aren't you, Mr. Mercer? I'm a desperate one. You've been in fights before? Yes? How many men have you fought? I don't keep count. More than 5? Probably. More than 10? I worked in cattle towns for 15 years. You do the math. Fletcher smiled. So you're comfortable with violence? I'm comfortable doing what needs to be done to protect my family. Even if that means killing? Wade met his eyes. Even then. Fletcher looked at the jury like Wade had just confessed. No further questions. Closing arguments were brief. Fletcher painted Wade as a dangerous criminal who'd gotten exactly what he wanted, an excuse to commit murder. Cole painted him as a father defending his children against powerful men who thought they could take whatever they wanted. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Clara sat with the boys in the gallery, watching Wade sit motionless at the defense table. Matthew gripped her hand hard enough to hurt. When the jury filed back in, their faces were unreadable. Have you reached a verdict? Judge Carrington asked. We have, Your Honor. How do you find? The foreman stood. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom exploded. Silas Grady's face went purple with rage. Wade's shoulders sagged with relief. The boys were crying, even Matthew. Judge Carrington banged his gavel. Order, this court is adjourned. Wade was released immediately. He walked out of the courthouse a free man, and his sons mobbed him in the street. Clara stood back, watching the reunion, feeling something warm and painful expand in her chest. Porter appeared beside her. We did it. You did it, Clara corrected. That took real courage. Yeah, well, I'm probably bankrupt by morning. Then you'll come work for me. I need someone who can manage numbers. Porter looked at her, surprised. You serious? I don't joke about employment. He laughed, shaky and relieved. Clara walked over to where Wade stood surrounded by his boys. He looked up, and their eyes met. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet. We still have a ranch to save. Can't we just have one night to celebrate? Clara smiled. One night. Then we get back to work. But as they walked back toward their horses, Clara saw Samuel Grady watching from across the street. His face was cold and calculating. This wasn't over. The Gradys didn't lose gracefully, and Clara had just humiliated them in front of the entire town. The retribution started small. 3 days after the trial, Clara's cattle started dying. Not all at once. Just one here, one there. They'd wander to the water trough healthy and be found dead by morning, foam crusting their mouths and their eyes glassed over. Poison. Wade tested the water himself, dipping a finger in and touching it to his tongue before Clara could stop him. He spat immediately. Arsenic. Maybe strychnine. He dumped the trough, his jaw tight. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. How many have we lost? Clara asked. 4. Maybe 5 by tomorrow if any others drank. 4 cattle was a quarter of her herd. At this rate, she'd have nothing left by Christmas. Matthew appeared from the barn. I found tracks. 3 riders came through the north pasture last night. You're sure? Fresh prints heading straight to the trough, then back out toward Grady land. Wade and Clara exchanged looks. This was different from the previous attacks. No dramatic midnight raids, no burning buildings, just quiet, methodical destruction designed to bleed them dry slowly enough that no one could prove it was happening. We need to guard the water source, Wade said. We can't guard it every hour of every day, Clara countered. We're already stretched thin. Then we build a fence around it, lock it up at night. That'll take a week. We don't have a week. Wade's hands curled into fists. So what do you want to do? Just let them poison everything we've worked for? Clara walked to the house without answering. Inside, she pulled out the old survey maps Thomas had kept in a trunk under their bed. Property lines, water rights, deeds and claims going back 40 years. She spread them across the kitchen table, and Wade came in behind her. What are you looking for? Proof. Clara traced her finger along the boundaries marked on the yellowed paper. Grady's been claiming water rights for years, but I remember Thomas telling me something once. About how the original survey was wrong. Wrong how? The spring we found, the one feeding your well at Blackthorn, it's not on Grady land. It's on public territory. Has been since before statehood. Wade leaned over the map. If that's true, then Grady's been collecting fees for water access he doesn't legally control. That's fraud. Can you prove it? Clara pulled out another document. An original land grant from 1851, barely legible. This shows the territorial boundaries. See this line? It puts the spring 300 yards outside Grady's claim. Wade stared at the paper like it was a weapon he'd just discovered how to use. We take this to the county marshal. We take this to everyone. Clara started gathering documents. The marshal, the territorial governor, every newspaper within 100 miles. We make it so public that Grady can't bury it. He'll come after us harder. He's already coming after us as hard as he can. This just gives us something to hit back with. Matthew had been listening from the doorway. What do you need us to do? Clara looked at the boy. He'd aged years in the past few weeks. They all had. Ride to Millbrook. Find Harrison Cole. Tell him we need copies of these documents made and filed with the territorial office. Then find the nearest newspaper and tell them there's a story here about land fraud in Hatchbone Creek. That's 2 days' ride. Then you better leave now. Matthew nodded and left without argument. 10 minutes later, he was gone with James as backup, both of them armed and carrying copies of the most important documents wrapped in oilcloth. That left 5 boys, Wade and Clara, to hold the ranch against whatever came next. What came next was Sheriff Dawson riding up the next morning with an eviction notice. Says here you're in violation of water use regulations, Dawson announced, not bothering to dismount. Bank's calling in your note early. You've got 48 hours to vacate. Clara walked out onto the porch. I don't have a note with the bank. I own this land outright. Says here otherwise. Dawson waved the paper. Signed by Thomas Voss 3 months before he died. That's impossible. Thomas would never... Clara snatched the paper from his hand. The signature looked right. The date was plausible. But something about it felt wrong. It's a forgery, Wade said, looking over her shoulder. That's a serious accusation. It's a true one. Thomas Voss was already sick 3 months before he died. Could barely hold a pen. That signature's too steady. Dawson shrugged. Take it up with the bank. But until a judge says otherwise, this stands. You've got 48 hours. And if we don't leave, then I come back with deputies and remove you by force. He rode off, leaving Clara standing there with the fraudulent document in her shaking hands. Wade took it from her gently. We'll fight this. With what? The lawyer's 2 days away. The judge is in Grady's pocket. By the time we prove it's fake, we'll be living in the dirt. Then we don't prove it's fake. We just refuse to leave. Clara looked at him. That means a fight. I know. People could die. They could. Or we could roll over and let Grady take everything. Your choice. It wasn't really a choice. Clara had been alone too long to remember how to surrender. All right, she said. We make a stand. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Wade and the older boys dug trenches at the property line. Nothing fancy, just enough to slow riders and provide cover. They stockpiled ammunition, moved the youngest boys and all the food into the storm cellar under the house. Porter Finch showed up on the second day with 3 other merchants from town. We heard what's happening, Porter said. We want to help. Clara stared at them. You know what that means? Grady will destroy you. He's destroying us anyway, slowly. At least this way we choose how we go down. One of the other men, a blacksmith named Owen, stepped forward. My grandfather homesteaded in this valley 50 years ago. I'll be damned if I let some Eastern money man take it without a fight. The third was a rancher named Beth Carver, who'd lost half her land to Grady over the past decade. She didn't say anything, just checked the rifle she'd brought and nodded at Clara. This is stupid, Clara said. You're risking everything. So are you, Porter replied. Difference is, you're doing it for all of us. Wade organized them into positions. Porter and Owen took the western approach. Beth covered the east. Wade and Clara held the center near the house. When the 48 hours expired, Sheriff Dawson came back with 12 men. Not deputies, hired guns, men who got paid to hurt people and didn't ask questions. They stopped at the property line. Dawson called out, This is your last chance, Voss. Walk away now and nobody gets hurt. Clara stepped out onto the porch where everyone could see her. This is my land, my home. You want it, you'll have to kill me for it. Dawson turned to the men behind him. Burn them out. The gunmen spread out, circling the property. Clara watched them move, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The moment where words stopped mattering and violence became the only language that worked. Wade appeared beside her. Get down to the cellar with the boys. No. Clara, I said no. This is my ranch. I'm not hiding while other people fight for it. The first torch was lit. Clara raised her rifle. Then a voice cut through the tension like a blade.
I wouldn't do that if I were you. Everyone turned. Harrison Cole stood at the property line with a man in a territorial marshal's uniform. Behind them, Matthew and James sat on horseback, looking exhausted but triumphant. The marshal stepped forward. I'm Marshal William Grant. I've got a federal order here suspending all evictions in this valley pending investigation of land fraud. Anyone who proceeds with this action will be arrested. Dawson's face went white. On whose authority? The territorial governor's. Seems someone provided him with some very interesting documents about Mr. Silas Grady's business practices. Grant looked at Clara. You Mrs. Voss? I am. You've caused quite a stir. Governor wants a full audit of every land transaction Grady's made in the past 20 years. Dawson was backing his horse up. This is a local matter. It was a local matter. Now it's fraud, extortion, and about 6 other crimes I can think of off the top of my head. Grant gestured to the hired guns. You boys want to stick around for the arrests, or you want to ride out while you still can? The gunmen scattered. Within 30 seconds, only Dawson remained, and he looked like he wanted to disappear too. This isn't over, Dawson said. Actually, it is. Grant pulled out another paper. You're suspended from duty pending investigation into your role in Grady's operation. Badge and gun. Now! Dawson's face cycled through rage, fear, and resignation before settling on defeat. He handed over his badge and rode off without another word. The moment he was gone, Clara's legs nearly gave out. Wade caught her elbow. You all right? Ask me later. Marshal Grant walked up to the porch. I'll need statements from everyone. But you should know, the documents your boys delivered started a firestorm. Turns out Grady's been running the same scheme in 4 other counties. You might have just brought down the most corrupt land operation in the territory. What happens to our ranches? Clara asked. Any land acquired through fraud gets returned to the original owners or their heirs. It'll take time to sort out, but you're not losing your home. Clara looked at Wade, at the boys emerging from the cellar, at Porter and Owen and Beth, who'd risked everything to stand with her. Thank you, she said to Grant. Don't thank me. Thank whatever made you stubborn enough not to quit. Grant spent the next 3 days taking statements and documenting evidence. Word spread fast. By the second day, a dozen other ranchers had come forward with their own stories of Grady corruption. By the third day, federal agents had seized Grady's bank records and locked down his assets. Silas Grady himself was arrested on the 4th day. Clara wasn't there to see it. She was at Blackthorn with Wade, helping him finish the roof on the new barn they'd been building. But Matthew rode over with the news, his face split in a grin Clara had never seen before. They took him in chains, Matthew said, right out of his fancy house in front of the whole town. What about Samuel? Clara asked. Gone. Disappeared the night before, probably ran east where his father's money can still buy him protection. Wade hammered in another nail. Good riddance. But Clara wasn't so sure. Men like Samuel Grady didn't just disappear. They waited, planned, came back when you least expected it. Still, for now, they'd won. The valley slowly started to breathe again. Porter reopened his store with new policies about who he'd serve. Owen started taking contracts from ranchers who'd been shut out of work for years. Beth Carver got back 200 acres she'd lost in a rigged auction. And Clara's ranch, which had been teetering on the edge of collapse, started to recover. The cattle they'd lost to poison were replaced with new stock purchased from a traveling trader. The burned barn got patched well enough to last through winter. The fences got mended. The water ran clean. It wasn't perfect. Nothing on the frontier ever was. But it was theirs, and that mattered. One evening in late November, Clara stood on her porch watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of orange and gold. Wade walked up beside her, wiping grease off his hands. Boys are asking if they can sleep in the house tonight, he
he said. Getting cold in the barn. Tell them yes. There's room. Wade studied her face. You sure? That's a lot of bodies in a small space. I've been alone in this house for 3 years. I think I can handle some company. He smiled. They're loud. I'll survive. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. After a moment, Wade spoke again. I've been thinking about something. Dangerous habit. He ignored that. This partnership we've got. It's been working. It has. And the boys, they're settled here. They like it. Charlie's talking again. Daniel's put on weight. Even Matthew seems less angry. Clara waited. There was something else coming. I was thinking maybe we should make it permanent, Wade said. Combine the ranches officially. Make it legal. We'd need a lawyer for that. I know a good one. Clara looked at him. What exactly are you proposing? Wade met her eyes. I'm proposing that we stop pretending this is temporary, that we acknowledge we work better together than apart, that we... He stopped, started again. I'm saying I don't want to leave, and I don't think you want us to. He wasn't wrong. Somewhere between the first meal she'd given them and the fight they'd just survived, this arrangement had stopped being about mutual benefit and started being about something else. Something Clara wasn't quite ready to name. The boys would stay? She asked. All of them, if you'll have us. And you? Me too, if you'll have me. Clara thought about it. About waking up to noise instead of silence. About sharing the work instead of carrying it alone. About having someone to talk to who understood what the frontier took from people and what it gave back. I'll have you, she said quietly. Wade's shoulders relaxed. Yeah? Yeah. But we do it right. Legal documents, property shares, everything written down so there's no confusion. I wouldn't expect anything less. They shook hands on it, and Clara felt something settle into place that had been loose since Thomas died. Not love exactly. Not yet. But the possibility of it, the foundation that might become something more given time. Matthew interrupted them 10 minutes later, asking about dinner. The younger boys were fighting over who got to sleep where. Charlie was following Wade around like a shadow. Daniel was trying to convince James to help him build a treehouse, the house filled with noise and chaos, and Clara found herself smiling despite the headache forming behind her eyes. This was what she'd been missing, not just help with the work, not just protection, but life. Messy, loud, complicated life that made the silence worth breaking. That night, after everyone had finally settled down and the house was quiet, except for the sound of 7 boys breathing in various corners, Clara sat at her kitchen table with a cup of terrible coffee and the property documents spread in front of her. She thought about everything they'd survived, the attacks, the trial, the near eviction, the stand they'd made together. And she thought about what came next. Building a real partnership would take work, legal work, emotional work, the kind of work that required trust Clara hadn't exercised in years. But maybe that was the point. Maybe surviving the frontier wasn't about doing everything alone. Maybe it was about finding the people worth fighting alongside and building something that could outlast the violence. Wade appeared in the doorway, checking on her. Can't sleep? He asked. Too much to think about. Want company? Clara nodded. He sat down across from her and they went through the documents together, planning how to structure the partnership in a way that protected everyone. Hours passed. The coffee went cold. Outside, the temperature dropped toward freezing. But inside, for the first time in years, Clara Voss's house felt warm. Not perfect, not easy, but warm. And that was enough. The official partnership papers were filed 2 weeks later. Harrison Cole handled the legal work, drawing up documents that combined the properties while maintaining protections for both families. The ranch was renamed the Voss Mercer Ranch, and ownership was split equally. The town buzzed with gossip. Some people thought Clara had lost her mind. Others thought she'd gotten soft. A few understood what she was actually doing, building something strong enough to survive whatever the valley threw at them next, because there would be a next thing. There always was on the frontier. But for now, in the brief window between crisis and catastrophe, they had breathing room. Clara used it to do something she'd been putting off for 3 years. She visited Thomas's grave. It was on a small hill overlooking the valley, marked with a simple wooden cross. She stood there in the cold December wind and told him about everything that had happened, about Wade and the boys, about fighting the Gradys, About deciding to share the ranch instead of holding on to it alone. I know what you'd say, she told the grave. You'd say I should have done this years ago, that I was being stubborn, that the ranch was always meant to be shared. The wind picked up, rattling through the dry grass. I'm trying, Thomas. I'm trying to live again instead of just surviving. I think you'd like Wade. He's stubborn like you, decent like you, and his boys, her voice caught. His boys are good kids. They need a home, and I need. She stopped. Couldn't quite say it out loud, but she knew what she needed. She'd known for weeks. She needed family. She needed purpose. She needed to remember that the frontier didn't have to be fought alone. Clara walked back down the hill as the sun set behind the mountains. When she got home, the house was lit up with lamplight. Through the windows, she could see the boys setting the table for dinner, could see Wade helping Charlie with something, could hear laughter. She stood outside for a moment, just watching. This was hers now, all of it, the noise and the chaos and the responsibility and the risk, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Clara walked inside and 7 voices called out greetings. Wade looked up from whatever he was fixing and smiled. Dinner's almost ready. You hungry? Clara hung up her coat. Starving. She sat down at the head of the table, the same seat she'd sat in alone for 3 years, and let the conversation wash over her. They talked about the ranch, about plans for spring, about whether they could afford more cattle, about Daniel's crazy treehouse design, about Charlie's reading progress, normal things, family things. And Clara realized something. She'd spent 3 years thinking she was keeping Thomas's memory alive by preserving everything exactly as it was when he died. But she'd been wrong. Thomas's memory lived in the ranch they'd built together, and the best way to honor that wasn't to freeze it in time. It was to let it grow. Winter came hard that year, but the Voss Mercer Ranch weathered it better than anyone expected. The combined resources meant they could afford proper feed for the livestock. The extra hands meant the work got divided instead of crushing one person under its weight. And the partnership agreement meant that when problems arose, there were 2 adults to solve them instead of one widow carrying everything alone. But not everyone in Hatchbone Creek was happy about the arrangement. 3 months after Silas Grady's arrest, rumors started circulating. Whispers that Clara and Wade weren't really business partners, that the whole thing was improper, that a widow sharing a house with an unmarried man and 7 children was scandalous. Clara heard it first from Beth Carver, who'd stopped by to borrow tools. People are talking, Beth said bluntly. Thought you should know. People are always talking. This is different. They're saying things about you and Wade. Clara looked up from the harness she was mending. What kind of things? Beth's face colored slightly. The kind that questions your character. My character survived 3 years alone in a war with the Gradys. I think it can handle gossip. I'm not worried about your character. I'm worried about what happens when the talk gets loud enough that someone decides to do something about it. Clara set down the harness. Like what? Like getting a judge involved. Like questioning the custody of those boys. Like deciding that maybe Wade's not a fit parent if he's living in sin. The words hit Clara like cold water. She hadn't thought about that angle. Hadn't considered that the same people who'd watched Grady terrorize the valley for years might suddenly develop moral standards about sleeping arrangements. We're not doing anything wrong, Clara said. I know that. You know that. But perception matters out here, and right now the perception is that you're, Beth struggled for diplomatic phrasing, living in an arrangement that isn't proper. Clara found Wade in the barn that evening and told him what Beth had said. He listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each sentence. So, what do they want? He asked when she finished. Want me to move the boys back to Blackthorn? Sleep in a half-finished barn while you freeze alone in that house? I think they want us to either separate completely or make it official. Wade went very still. Official how? Clara met his eyes. You know how. The word hung between them. Marriage. The legal and social solution to a problem that shouldn't exist but did because the frontier had rules about how widows and single fathers were allowed to survive. That's not why I want to marry you, Wade said quietly. I know. I mean it, Clara. This isn't about solving a scandal. This is about... He stopped, started again. I care about you. Have for a while now. But I won't ask you to marry me just to shut up some gossips. What if I'm asking you? Wade stared at her. What? What if I'm saying that maybe the gossips are right? Not about the sin part, but but about the fact that what we've built here is more than a business partnership. Clara took a breath. I'm not good at this. At talking about feelings, Thomas used to say I had the emotional range of a fence post. But I know what I want, Wade. And I want this. All of it. The ranch. The boys. You. Wade's throat worked. You sure? I survived 3 years alone. I know the difference between settling and choosing. And you're choosing this? I'm choosing you. Wade crossed the distance between them and kissed her. It was awkward and tentative, and nothing like the romantic moments Clara had read about in books back east. But it was real. And it was theirs. When they pulled apart, Wade was smiling. Guess I should ask properly then. Clara Voss, will you marry me? On one condition. Name it. We do it simple. No fuss. Just us and the boys and whoever wants to witness it. I'm not putting on a show for the same people who stood by while Grady tried to destroy us. Deal. They were married 2 weeks later in Clara's kitchen, with Porter Finch officiating and all 7 boys serving as witnesses. Matthew stood up as Wade's best man. Beth Carver stood with Clara. Harrison Cole drew up a new marriage contract that protected both their interests while combining their assets completely. The ceremony took 10 minutes. The celebration afterward lasted until dawn, with neighbors trickling in throughout the night to offer congratulations and consume alarming amounts of food and whiskey. Charlie fell asleep on Clara's lap halfway through, and she carried him upstairs to bed, the first time she'd done that for any of the boys. When she came back down, Matthew was waiting. Can I talk to you? He asked. Of course. They stepped outside onto the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like thrown salt. I wanted to say thank you, Matthew said, for everything, for taking us in, for fighting for us, for giving my pa a reason to stop looking so tired all the time. Clara didn't know what to say to that. I didn't do it alone. I know, but you started it. You could have turned us away that first night. Most people would have. I'm not most people. Matthew smiled. No, you're not. He hesitated. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you think my mother would have liked you? The question caught Clara off guard. She thought about what Wade had told her about his wife, about a woman who'd fought to keep her family together through drought and disease and poverty, about someone who died protecting her children from illness she couldn't afford to treat. I think your mother would have done exactly what I did if our positions were reversed, Clara said. And I think she'd be proud of the man you're becoming. Matthew's eyes got bright. He looked away quickly. I should go help clean up. Matthew, Clara waited until he looked back. You can call me Clara, or you can call me Ma if you want, whatever feels right. But either way, you're my son now. All of you are. That's not going to change. Matthew nodded, not trusting his voice. He went inside and Clara stood there alone for a moment, feeling the weight of what she'd just promised. 7 boys. 7 different people with 7 different needs and problems and futures. She'd just committed to mothering all of them. It was terrifying. It was also the most right thing she'd felt since Thomas died. Wade came out and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. You'll freeze. I'm fine. You're shivering. Clara leaned into him. It's a good night. It is. They stood there together, watching their ranch, because it was fully theirs now, no qualifications, spread out under the starlight. What happens next? Wade asked. We build, we grow, we survive whatever comes. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan that works out here. Wade kissed the top of her head. Then I guess we better get good at it. Spring came late but strong. The valley exploded with new growth, and the Voss Mercer Ranch exploded right along with it. The combined herds produced strong calves. The wells ran clean and steady. The crops they planted took root despite the unpredictable weather. And the boys, who'd arrived half-starved and hollow-eyed, started filling out and acting like children instead of survivors. Charlie's vocabulary expanded daily. Daniel built his treehouse with James's help, and it actually stayed standing. The younger boys started attending the school in town now that Clara could spare the time to drive them. And Matthew started talking about the future instead of just surviving the present. I want to study law, he announced one night at dinner. Wade nearly choked on his food. Law? Like Harrison Cole. Someone needs to make sure what happened with the Gradys doesn't happen again. Clara smiled. That's a good goal. It'll take years of school, money we don't have. We'll find it, Wade said. You want to be a lawyer, we'll make it happen. Matthew looked at his father with something like wonder. You mean it? I mean it. All of you. Wade looked around the table at all 7 boys. You want something better than this ranch? You go get it. Your mother and I will support whatever you choose. It was the first time Wade had called Clara their mother in front of the boys. The first time he'd claimed that future out loud. The boys absorbed this in silence. Then Daniel spoke up. What if I want to stay? Run the ranch when I'm older. Then you'll run the best damn ranch in the territory, Wade said. Either way, you choose. That's the point. Clara watched the conversation unfold and felt something shift in her understanding of what they were building. This wasn't just about surviving winter or defeating enemies. This was about giving 7 boys the chance to become whoever they wanted to be. That was the real victory. Not beating Silas Grady, not saving the ranch, but creating space for these children to have futures their circumstances had almost stolen from them. 6 months after the wedding, Porter Finch showed up with news. Grady's trial is set for next month. Federal prosecutors want you and Wade to testify. Clara had known this was coming, but had hoped to avoid it. Do we have to? You're the primary witnesses to his fraud. Without your testimony, he might walk. Wade had joined them on the porch. What happens if he walks? Probably nothing immediately. He's lost most of his money and influence, but men like that have a way of rebuilding. Better to finish this now. Then we testify, Clara said. The trial took place in the territorial capital, 3 days' ride from Hatchbone Creek. Clara and Wade left the boys in Beth Carver's care and made the journey with heavy hearts. Silas Grady looked smaller in the courtroom than Clara remembered. Diminished. The fine clothes were gone, replaced with prison gray. The certainty that had made him so dangerous had been replaced with the desperate calculation of a man trying to avoid hanging. The prosecution built their case methodically. Document after document proving fraud. Witness after witness describing intimidation and violence. By the 3rd day, even Grady's expensive lawyers looked defeated. When it was Clara's turn to testify, she told the truth. All of it. The threats, the barn burning, the poisoned cattle, the attempt to forge her husband's signature. Grady's lawyer tried to paint her as a vengeful widow with an axe to grind. Clara let him talk, then responded simply. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to keep my home. If that makes me vengeful, then I guess I am. But everything I've said is true, and the documents prove it. Wade's testimony was similar, factual, unembellished, devastating in its simplicity. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Silas Grady was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His assets were seized and distributed to victims of his fraud. His empire, built over 30 years of corruption, crumbled in an afternoon. Clara felt no satisfaction watching him led away in chains. Just exhaustion. And maybe something like pity for a man who'd spent his entire life accumulating power only to lose everything when people finally stopped being afraid. On the ride home, Wade was quiet. You all right? Clara asked. Just thinking about how close we came to losing. If you hadn't kept those documents, if Matthew hadn't made it to the marshal, if Porter hadn't testified. But we didn't lose. This time. What about next time? Clara understood what he was really asking. The frontier had a way of creating new threats as fast as you defeated old ones. There would be droughts, disease, economic collapse, 100 different ways to fail. Next time we'll fight again, Clara said. That's all we can do. Fight and adapt and refuse to quit. And if we can't win, then we go down swinging, but we don't go down alone. That's the difference now. Wade reached across and took her hand. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, watching the landscape change from capital territory back to the valley they'd fought so hard to keep. When they crested the final hill and saw the ranch spread below them, fences mended, buildings solid, smoke rising from the chimney where the boys were probably making dinner, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of conflict. The frontier would never give her that, but the knowledge that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The boys mobbed them when they arrived, full of questions about the trial and the city, and whether they'd brought presents. Charlie attached himself to Wade's leg and wouldn't let go. Matthew took the horses without being asked. That night, after dinner and stories and the usual chaos of getting 7 boys settled for sleep, Claire and Wade sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. "You know what I realized today?" Wade said. "What?" "I spent 5 years after my wife died thinking I'd failed them, failed her, because I couldn't provide enough, couldn't keep them all safe, couldn't be what they needed. You did the best you could. Maybe, but it never felt like enough." Wade looked at her. "Then we met you and everything changed. Not because you fixed everything, but because you showed me that struggling doesn't mean failing, that asking for help isn't weakness, that survival is a team effort." Clara's throat was tight. "I learned the same thing from you. I spent 3 years convinced that accepting help meant admitting I couldn't do it alone, that I was somehow betraying Thomas by not being strong enough to maintain everything he built. But you can't build a life alone. You can exist. You can survive. But actually living requires other people, requires trust, requires admitting that maybe 2 people carrying half the load each is smarter than 1 person breaking under all of it." Wade was quiet for a moment. "Think the boys will remember any of this when they're older?" "Some of it. Probably not the specifics, but they'll remember how it felt. Having a home, being safe, knowing that the adults in their lives would fight for them. That's enough, isn't it? That's what we're supposed to give them. It's more than most frontier kids get. It's more than we got." Wade laughed softly. "True enough." They sat there until the cold drove them inside. The house was dark except for the banked fire in the hearth. 7 boys slept in various rooms, their breathing creating a rhythm that had become familiar as her own heartbeat. Clara stood in the kitchen, where she'd eaten alone for 3 years, and felt the ghost of that loneliness like an old scar. Still there, still tender if you pressed on it, but healed enough that she could carry it without being consumed by it. That was the thing about grief and trauma and survival. You didn't erase them. You just learned to live alongside them. You built something new that acknowledged the pain while refusing to be defined by it. The ranch had been Thomas's dream, but it was Clara's reality now. Hers and Wade's and 7 boys who needed it to be more than just dirt and buildings, who needed it to be a home. And it was. Finally. After years of feeling like a museum to a dead man's memory, the ranch lived again. Not the same way it had when Thomas was alive. Different, louder, more chaotic, but alive in a way that mattered more than perfection. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of the boys arguing about chores and Wade already outside feeding livestock. She got up, made terrible coffee that Wade would drink anyway, and started breakfast for 9 people. Matthew came downstairs first, already dressed for work. "Morning, Ma." The word still startled her sometimes, but in a good way. "Morning, you sleep all right?" "Well enough." Matthew started setting the table without being asked. "Pa and I were talking yesterday about maybe expanding the herd come fall. We'd need more grazing land." "That's what I told him, but he says the north pasture could support another 20 head if we manage the rotation right." Clara considered this. "He's not wrong, but we'd need to hire help. Can't manage that many cattle with just us. I could delay school, help through the season." "Absolutely not. You want to be a lawyer, you need education. We'll hire someone." "That's expensive." "So is wasting your potential." Clara pointed at him with a spatula. "Your father and I agreed. Education comes first for all of you." Matthew smiled. "Yes, ma'am." The other boys filtered in gradually, each adding to the noise and chaos. By the time everyone was seated, the kitchen was packed and loud, and exactly the kind of mess Clara had once thought she'd never want. But she did want it, wanted all of it. The noise and the arguments and the endless work and the constant worry about whether they'd make it through another season. Because underneath all of that was something more valuable than silence or perfection or the illusion of control. Family. Not the one she'd been born into, not the one she'd lost, but the one she'd chosen and fought for and built piece by piece through trial and error and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. After breakfast, as the boys scattered to their various tasks and Wade headed out to check fences, Clara stood at her kitchen window watching them all move across the property with purpose and direction. This was what victory looked like. Not defeating an enemy or winning a trial, but creating space for life to continue, for children to grow, for hope to take root in soil that had been salted with too much pain. The frontier had tried to break her, had taken her husband, had isolated her, had thrown every possible obstacle between her and survival. But she'd survived anyway. Not because she was stronger than everyone else, not because she was special, but because when it mattered most, she'd made the choice to trust, to accept help, to build something with others instead of trying to carry everything alone. That was the real lesson, the thing that mattered more than any individual victory. You could be strong, you could be stubborn, you could fight every battle with everything you had, but you couldn't win alone. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. Real strength was knowing when to ask for help. Real courage was admitting you needed other people. Real victory was building something that could outlast your own survival. Clara had spent 3 years learning that lesson the hard way, but she'd learned it. And in doing so, she'd saved more than just her ranch. She'd saved herself. Porter stopped by that afternoon with mail from town, letters from the territorial governor thanking them for their testimony, a notice that additional land grants were being reviewed and several families would be getting property back, news that Sheriff Dawson had been officially removed from office and replaced with someone who wasn't corrupt. Small victories. Incremental changes. But they added up. Whole valley's different now, Porter said. People aren't as scared. Businesses are starting to open up that wouldn't have dared before. Even the banks under new management. That's good, Clara said. It's more than good. It's revolutionary. Porter looked at her seriously. You know what you did, right? You didn't just beat one corrupt man. You showed everyone else that it was possible to fight back. That scared people can become brave if someone's willing to go first. Clara hadn't thought of it that way. She'd just been trying to survive, to protect what was hers. But maybe that was how real change happened. Not through grand gestures or heroic moments, but through ordinary people deciding they'd had enough and refusing to back down. You went first too, Clara reminded him. Your testimony mattered. Only because you made it possible, you and Wade. You showed the rest of us what courage looked like. After Porter left, Clara found Wade in the barn repairing tack. Porter thinks we're heroes, she said. Wade laughed. Porter's always been prone to exaggeration. Maybe, but he's not entirely wrong. We did change things. We survived, that's all. Is it? Clara sat down on a hay bale. Think about what this valley was like when you arrived. Think about what it is now. That's not nothing. Wade set down the leather he was working on. I suppose when you put it that way. We gave people hope. Showed them that fighting back was possible. That's worth something. And what did we get in return? Clara looked around the barn, at the tools hung neatly on walls, at the livestock healthy in their stalls, at the life they'd built from desperation and determination. Everything, she said simply. We got everything. That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner as usual, but tonight felt different, lighter, like some weight that had been pressing down on all of them had finally lifted. The boys were louder than usual, full of plans and dreams. Charlie told a joke that didn't quite make sense, but made everyone laugh anyway. Daniel announced he'd finished his treehouse and everyone was invited to see it tomorrow. James wanted to know if they could get a dog. Wade fielded questions and settled arguments with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing this his whole life. Clara watched him and thought about the broken man who'd shown up at her door months ago, desperate and exhausted and convinced he was out of options. He looked different now, lighter, like he'd been carrying weight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. She probably looked different too. After the boys were asleep, Clara and Wade sat together on the porch like they did most nights. The valley stretched out before them, dark and quiet and full of possibility. You ever think about what would have happened if you'd turned us away that first night? Wade asked. Sometimes, but not much. What's the point? The point is, I want to thank you for taking a chance on 8 strangers who had nothing to offer except hunger and desperation. You had more than that. You had determination, work ethic, 7 boys who needed a home. Still, you could have said no. Clara thought about that. I could have, but I would have regretted it for the rest of my life. Some chances you have to take even when they seem impossible. Like trusting a widow you just met to help you dig a well? Like trusting a broken cowboy to help you remember how to live. They sat in comfortable silence until the cold drove them inside. In the bedroom they now shared, Clara lay awake, listening to Wade's steady breathing beside her, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. The fear, the fighting, The moments when everything seemed impossible and quitting seemed like the only rational choice. But they hadn't quit. Neither of them. They'd fought and adapted and built something that mattered more than either of them could have created alone. That was the real story. Not heroes defeating villains, not perfect people doing perfect things, but broken people finding each other and building something strong enough to carry them both. The frontier hadn't gotten softer. Winter would still come, drought would still threaten. There would be lean years and setbacks and moments of doubt, but they'd face it together now. 2 adults and 7 boys building a life one day at a time. And maybe that was all anyone could really do. Take the hand offered. Fight the battles worth fighting. Build something worth protecting. Clara fell asleep with Wade's arm around her and the sound of her family breathing in rooms down the hall. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone. For the first time in longer than that, she wasn't afraid. The ranch would continue. The boys would grow. Life would happen with all its complications and joys and inevitable pain. But whatever came next, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else, together. And that made all the difference.